I'm obviously Marleen Westerveld. I'm a senior lecturer here at Griffith University. Started a couple of months before we got our first cohort of students started with Libby Cardell and Sam. My background is firmly pediatrics, child language and spontaneous language sampling and analysis, and started out as a clinician, then did my master's and my PhD, and I very much like to think I'm an applied researcher. I'd like to think that all the research I do has some sort of benefits of clinical practice. So today I'm going to talk about early childhood literacy and the role of the speech-language pathologist. I set the topic thinking, you know, that's sort of an area I'm really interested in. I've done quite a bit of research, and there's much more to be done, and there's a whole lot of research out there already. Looking back, I think I should have stuck to just a 10-minute overview or a whole day. I think doing an hour and a half is almost harder because there is so much to cover. So what I'm going to try and do today is give you an overview of what I feel are sort of the most pertinent points for us as speech pathologists to take away. If you want to add to that at any stage, please feel free, because I do know that some of you work in this area and have specific expertise, more so than I have, in areas of emergent literacy. So please feel free to add or contradict, that's fine too. You know, we're here to discuss things. Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do today is, like I said, give you an overview, quite a thorough overview, because I just wanted to make sure that we're all talking about the same construct. Then let's look at who's considered at risk. And again, I don't think there'll be any surprises there. Then I've tried to divide it into 3 different streams, and one is prevention, the other one is preventive intervention, and then we're going to look at intervention, so our more traditional speech pathology intervention. I want to speak briefly about special populations, and special populations, I don't want to be politically incorrect, but would be children with Down syndrome, for example, or children with autism spectrum disorders. And then really I want to highlight the importance of an integrated approach. So if that's the take-home message, I'll be happy with that. And of course there's time for questions at the end, I hope, but feel free to interrupt at any stage as well. Okay, so emergent literacy skills. It's from birth to about 5 years of age. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm sure when I was born, my mum didn't put a book in my cot. You know, whereas now these days, I think people do. So I think there's a great realization that literacy starts quite early on. So what happens during this period? Most children will show a keen interest in print. And we're just talking typically developing children, of course. They'll pretend to read little books. They'll play with writing utensils or write stories. So this guy can just pull himself up and is already writing on the whiteboard. So he's a speech pathologist's son, of course. They enjoy sharing books, most kids do. They participate in sound games like rhyming words, alliteration, so listening to first sounds in words. And they will start to use literacy themes in their play. So they'll act out being the pirate or being the cowboy, that sort of thing. If we look at a little bit of theory behind it, then what do we know? We know that it begins at birth, like I said, and many milestones are achieved before children start school. And I'm sure this is not new to you either, although for a lot of parents, this may be new information, of course. There's also this great bidirectional relationship between literacy and language development. So language is really the foundation to literacy development. But once children learn to read, that reading actually then fuels language development. And again, that's something that is often overlooked, more so perhaps by other professionals. Children are active participants in the reading process, and they acquire much of their literacy knowledge incidentally. You know, so they will just pick it up on the go, typically developing children. However, their literacy development itself is guided by adults. So if we get kids to scribble on a piece of paper, they might sort of have a bit of an attempt at writing their name. They won't get to their full name without some assistance from adults. That makes sense. And like I said, it tends to follow a developmental sequence. Now that doesn't mean that for the kids that we often end up working with, we have to follow that developmental pathway. So we don't have to wait for them to be ready to start sort of encouraging those early emergent literacy skills. Okay, so a different way of looking, or one way of looking at emergent literacy skills is really to divide them into print-related skills and oral language-related skills. So print-related skills I would call phonological awareness, and we'll come to all these terms in the next few slides, letter knowledge and print concepts. Some people would consider perhaps phonological awareness to be more of a language skill, right? But for this presentation, I'm actually going to put it under print, and I'll show you why in a minute when we look at a view of reading, a theory of reading. And then we look at the oral language related skills. So we have vocabulary knowledge, very important, and grammatical ability, of course, and discourse skills, in particular story retelling and comprehension. This might be a bit small to read, but others then divide them into 4 domains. So you read about print knowledge, phonological awareness, writing pops in, which comes under print concepts, on the print-related skills, and oral language is everything that's on the right-hand side. All of these, of course, are heavily influenced by the home literacy environment. Okay, so have you heard of the simple view of reading? Most of you? Not all of you. Yeah. It was introduced by Goff and Tummer. So Bill Tummer is actually a New Zealand, he works in New Zealand at Massey. And they said that reading comprehension is the product of word recognition and language comprehension. Seems very simple. What it basically means is that for reading comprehension to occur, and let's be honest, the ultimate aim of learning to read is to understand what you're reading, right? There's no point decoding something and then for it not to make sense. So for reading comprehension to occur, we need to recognize the words on the page, and we need to have the language comprehension to understand what we've just read. Yeah? So neither of those can be zero. Now, what they found, and actually everyone agreed with that, but then of course the research world got into action and they said, okay, let's prove if this is right. And so far nobody is disputing it. It's working out quite well. And what they're finding is that there are unique contributions of word recognition and listening comprehension to reading comprehension. Okay? So the skills can definitely be divided into those different sort of constructs that both feed into reading comprehension. But there's a changing contribution over time. And that makes sense because when children first start to learn to read, what they're reading at school in prep, like the bear is in the box, the man is whatever, book is in the box. It doesn't tax their language comprehension, does it? It's very simple vocabulary, often at a 3-year-old level, if not lower. But once they've learned to crack the code, if you like, and they get to year 3 or 4 of schooling, that's when really their listening comprehension skills become more important to get reading comprehension, right? So that's what explains the sort of what we sometimes hear about as the grade 4 or the year 3 reading slump. Have you heard of that? Yeah, because that's when kids get stuck. They've learned to decode, but their language skills aren't strong enough. So I'll come back to this simple view in sort of later slides, because if we think about our print-related skills feeding into word recognition, and our meaning-related skills, they will feed into language comprehension. And both of those are important to get good reading comprehension. Yeah? Okay, so just a sort of an overview of print concepts. Again, it's fascinating if you read, especially if you go on the internet, how many different ways there are of talking about the same thing, aren't there? So I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same idea. And I'm sure most of the tick boxes or screening forms you use in Education Queensland, or even with kids sort of working with younger kids in communities, Department of Communities, we look at, our children, do they know what books are all about? That's all this is. So do they know how to hold it, that there are pages, there's a beginning and an ending. So a typical way of doing it, you hand the child the book the wrong way around, and you want to see if the child will turn it the right way up. Or you might ask them, where's the author? There are lots of checklists available, and one frequently used one, well, in New Zealand anyway, would be the one by Marie Clay. Is that the one that we still use here? Yeah. Then on number 3, print form, you know that words are separated by spaces. There's a difference between words and letters. Then kids learn to point to individual words on a page, and that words are made up of letters. So this is all the basic stuff that goes on behind the scenes, if you like. Then looking at phonological awareness gets a little bit more complicated. Typically develops from larger to smaller linguistic units. So we have syllables, yeah, onset rhyme, beginning of the words, and phonemes, individual sounds of words. Phonological awareness can be seen in children as young as 3 years of age. There was quite a landmark study back in, I think it was like 92 or something. So these little typically developing kids can already do it. Because what we used to think is that you need reading for phoneme awareness to occur. But that's not the case. It sort of starts to develop quite early. And it's not the same as phonics. So I'm hoping you're all aware of that, but in schools quite often you talk about phonological awareness, and there's this underlying assumption that you're talking about phonics. Yeah, is that what you're finding? And basically phonics, of course, is the matching of sounds or letter names to the sounds. So jolly phonics isn't the same as working on phonological awareness. Now I want to test your knowledge a little bit. I thought we might just, let's look at syllables first. Okay, so have you got a pen? Just write down your own performance. I'm not going to ask you to say the answers, but what I am going to do is you can sort of check your own performance, and then I'm going to show you the results of a survey that was done just 2 years ago, and it's quite interesting. Okay, how many syllables in each of the following words? And you just have to listen to how I say the word, okay, with my Dutch accent. Okay, so just write down the answers. Animal. How many syllables in animal? I'm going to go really fast. Portion. Hastily. Revolution. Inconceivable. And fortunate. Yep, I've got 4 questions in total. Yeah, no cheating. Okay, the second one is about how many sounds, or maybe I should quickly give you the answers, right? We're not going to debate it, by the way. We're just going to say it's right or wrong. Okay, animal 3, portion 2, hastily 3, revolution 4, inconceivable 5, and fortunate 3. Okay? So give yourself a percentage score. Look. Yeah? Okay, next one. Now this is going to be interesting. How many sounds, not letters, are in each of the following words? Flag. So it's sounds, not letters. Flag. Scone. Change. Straight. You like to say that out loud. Chemist. And thought. Thought. Yeah. Okay, so we've got flag is 4, scone is 4, change is 4, straight is 5, chemist is 6, and thought is 3. Doesn't matter, you don't have to tell anyone how you did. I'm going to show you how others did in a minute. Okay, question 3, second sound. And we won't do any more of these quizzes in the next hour, so don't worry. Okay, what is the second sound, not letter, the second sound in each of the following words? Bride. whim, bought, I bought something, queen, and thrive, thrive. Yeah? Okay, the answers are the I for win, or, the O sound, the W, and the her sound. Okay. Last question. There are only 4 in here. I'm going easy on you here. The last sound, not the letter, in each of the following words. Laugh, laugh. Though, giraffe, and arrange. I'm actually going to do some of these with the students next week. They don't know this yet. I've got ethics for that, not to get your answers. Okay, the answers are F, an O, an F, and the J. Yeah? Okay. Now, let's see. My colleague, Jane Carroll, just a couple of years ago in New Zealand, she surveyed 700 educators. So she had
Interesting stuff. Yeah.
700 educators from across New Zealand. And she had like 40 SLPs. I don't know if it's easy to see. The next ones are the resource teachers and literacy. Then we've got resource teachers, and learning and behavior. We've got some teachers, early childhood education teachers. Now they have a bachelor's degree as well. Teacher aides, 3rd year Bachelor of Teaching. So she got ethics, like I'm going to get ethics for my students. And 1st year Bachelor of Teaching degree. So, what's your conclusion? It's a worry, isn't it? So hopefully you're all doing us proud. Right? Anyone struggled? You don't have to say yes, but but that's phonological awareness, right? That's phoneme awareness. So what Jane found, and we're finding the same with the Bachelor of Education students. We're doing a study actually this year with 400 first-year Bachelor of Education students here at Griffith University. And we're actually going to make them do it in class. Now they can say they don't want to participate, but we're going to give them the survey. Because I think it's going to be vitally important that, you know, oh, let's not jump the gun. So what she did is she actually then took a group of ECE, early childhood education professionals, and did it again after 9 weeks. Just to see, look, did it change spontaneously just by taking the test, right? No change. However, when she provided a training session, so the conclusion is, when providing a training session, do not assume competency in this area. And it's a tricky, because we've just run a program in Logan, and I'll come back to that later, and we do assume knowledge, and we almost feel like we're sort of being a little bit patronizing if perhaps we include it as part of our training package. What she found though, Jane, is she investigated then the effects of phonological awareness training and that was just a 90-minute training session, to the effects of coaching and training. So 90 minutes training plus 4, I think she did 4 coaching sessions, compared to a non-training control group. So they just did the tests and nothing happened. And what she found is that both groups of teachers really improved in response to the training, well, you'd like to think so. But also that the children in the early childhood education centers did the best, like made the most improvement, if those teachers received training plus coaching. So take that on board. I think that's a very interesting and important finding. I would think that that generalizes to Australia, right? Okay, so hopefully you did all right. So if we're looking at assessment of phonological awareness, and I'm talking about the little kids, right? So I don't know what sort of tests you typically use, but we don't have to go to a very difficult battery or expensive battery of tests, because we know it follows this developmental sequence. So it's basically just a matter of checking whether kids achieve it. And I know that a lot of people use, for example, the SPAT-I, everyone seems to use. But for the younger kids, I don't know if you know about Gail Gillen's preschool phonological awareness assessment probes. They work amazingly well. You just print them out, they're big, lovely, colorful pictures, and the kids just choose the one that matches the one, the sound that you're after. All right, and then you can just see, okay, can the child actually hear first sounds in words? There's also a great website that you may have heard of. It's the Dibbles website. It's got free resources, free assessments, free programs, everything else. And then of course there are standardized tests like the PIPA as well. Although I must say the PIPA is quite hard because it asks for the odd one out. Especially if a child is already sort of challenged by difficult tasks, then task performance might really influence the child's abilities. Okay, enough on phonological awareness for now. All right, then let's look at writing. I don't think we look enough at writing. I don't know if you do, but in general, when I look around, we tend not to. So if we look at these writing attempts, what we did is we did a study in New Zealand. We had 92 typically developing children who attended kindergartens, and we got them to, they did lots of emergent literacy tasks, but one of the tasks was, can you write your name? And we just gave them the piece of paper. And what you see is their attempts. We used a scoring procedure that was published by Cabell et al., and it's on your reference list. And it basically looks at the child's ability to use conventional letters, but also to use like placeholders. So they're just your little circles to, the child shows, okay, I know there's more coming, but I'm not quite sure, but it's letters, right? And it's a lovely scoring procedure because in this example, what we find is that, of course, that one child just does a smiley face. That's okay, doesn't get a score for that, unfortunately. This little child here got a score of 7, and Brooke got a score of 12. And then if you have a score of 14, it actually means that you can do quite well. You may think, so, let's not jump the gun. Okay, so what did we find? We found that more than 80%.
Yeah. What was the general age range of those children?
These kids were just 4-year-olds. Yeah, and there were 92 kids from a range of socio-economic areas, but all attending what we call free kindergarten in New Zealand. So it's the year before they start year 1 or prep. Yeah. And we did find that more than 80% of the kids were able to write their name or letters using recognizable letters with what we call placeholders. Yeah. And there were strong correlations between name writing home practice. So we asked parents, do you teach your child to write at home, and letter name knowledge? And we all know, of course, that letter name knowledge is a very strong predictor of future reading success. So it's not a trivial little splinter skill that you think, oh yeah, they just taught the child to do it and he just copies it. It seems to tap more than just that. So it really highlights the importance of children's home literacy environment and involving parents in emergent literacy training. But of course, then you think, yeah, okay, so a 4-year-old can write his name. What does that mean? Does that set the child up for success? And what we did, and we're not the only ones, lots of people looked into this. We looked at them again a year later, so they had now started their formal education. And we gave them like an invented spelling list. Now, these are real words, but they're very low frequency words. So the children aren't really expected to be familiar with those words. And they were scored using the spelling sensitivity scoring. Again, I won't go into it, but it's explained really nicely by Masterson and Appel, and I think it's a great clinical tool. And we just wanted to see, score them on, does the child use conventional letters? Is it a plausible word? Is it incorrect or implausible, or did the child not represent the word at all? So we tested it a year after we'd asked them to write their names. We also got copies out of their journal writing books, and I love those ones, just to see, because dictation is sort of a very clinician-directed activity. We wanted to see what do kids do when they're given just the freedom to write. And what we found actually, that early name writing was significantly associated with invented spelling performance in dictation and journal writing assessment context in the first year of schooling. And that scoring procedure seemed a very sensitive assessment tool. So again, there's some good evidence to really at least consider children's emergent name writing abilities. And how easy is it? When you're doing your assessment, you say, can you write your name? And they'll give it a go, say, oh, I can't do that. Yeah. So, of course, Cabell et al., so she's one of Laura Justice's colleagues, and you've no doubt heard of Laura Justice's amazing work in this area. They found that children with identified language impairment lag behind their typical peers in early name writing. Okay, so again, it seems to have more than just the motoric skill of printing something. They also found that it was associated with alphabet knowledge and print concepts in kids with language impairment. So it's not just in your typical kids that relationship is there. So really what they recommended is that speech pathologists and educators are encouraged to address print-related skills for children with language impairments in their early intervention. And I've worked with quite a few people who work sort of with those early years, kids in those early years, and talk to therapists who work in private practice, and not many of us seem to address writing. And sort of that seems to be still an area that's for the teacher sort of thing. But definitely, there's such a close link that I strongly advise you to include that. Yeah? Okay, let's move on. Oral language, then it gets messier. Those other ones I find quite easy, but so oral language really includes grammar, like I said, vocabulary, and narrative skills. Now we all know, like letter name knowledge and phonological awareness, vocabulary is a very important predictor of future reading success, but it's not enough. A child with really strong vocabulary skills won't necessarily become a good reader. What they have found is that oral narrative skills in particular seem to have this predictive power for future academic success. And it's really because it's a language skills that is assessed in a decontextualized format. It's not about here and now, that children use at school all the time. If you look at the curriculum or the early childhood curriculum, early years framework, where we encounter stories all the time or personal narratives. So it's a skill that's vital for accessing the curriculum and participating. And it's a perfect opportunity to really look at the kids' expressive grammatical abilities, vocabulary abilities, putting words together in a sentence, and can they tell us a good story? So why is that? What goes on with stories, that makes them so interesting? So basically, the theory behind it is that if we listen to stories enough, we build this mental model of a story in our memory, in our long-term memory, right? So we know that stories have a middle, a beginning, and an end. We know that there's usually a problem at the beginning, and then something happens and we try and solve it. Yeah? How many of you have been to a movie that sort of starts off and you go, no, movies, stories don't start like that. Is that right? Yeah, and that's because it doesn't conform to the mental model that you've got for a story in that long-term memory, whatever that is. And what we do then is that mental model is fed by world knowledge, of course. If you listen to a story about diving, it may not make much sense if you've never seen a diver even. Definitely it's fed by vocabulary knowledge, because if a story has unfamiliar words, then that's really hard to follow. And grammatical knowledge. If the sentences are really complex and passive, once again, it has difficulty contributing to that. Once you've got a good mental model and you've got skills in all these areas, and in particular strong text structure knowledge, so you've got something to use as a framework for remembering, then that really aids your comprehension of both the written and a verbal narrative. So the idea behind it is, if I tell a child who's got a good mental model, good story structure knowledge, good oral language skills, a story once, the story will make enough sense and he will be able to retell the story after one go. Yeah. So how do we often test it is we ask kids to tell or retell a story. Now, of course, all this is within sort of a working memory, limited working memory capacity, right? So if it's a really long new story, then that's going to be hard for little kids. The protocol that we use, actually, we get the kids to listen to it twice because we don't want to make it too hard. Okay, next one. Oh, yeah. Okay. So then oral narrative seems to give a really nice, if we're talking about screening or evaluating a child's oral language skills that will be linked to literacy success later on, then oral narratives give us a really nice context for assessment. So we want to determine, is the child's narrative comprehension okay? Can he answer questions in relation to the story? Because remember to think back to the simple view of reading. If you don't understand what a simple story is about, then of course, if you would read the same story, that would be even harder to answer the questions. Does that make sense? Yeah. We want to know, is it a good quality story? And if it is a good quality story, then we can safely assume that the child's text structure knowledge is okay. Is the child able to use correct grammar and appropriate vocabulary? Again, there are lots of different procedures here. Some of them, so one is the NAP, Narrative Assessment Profile, that Laura Justice published on. We use Profile of Oral Narrative Ability. It's a little story. Some of you will have seen it, especially if anyone has helped out with the Queensland database project. Maybe not here today, well, Kate did. So that's Anna Gets Lost. So it's a little protocol of a story where the child listens to the story, answers questions, then the child listens to the story again, and then we ask the child to retell the story so that other children can listen to the story next time. And we've collected some normative data in Queensland from end of prep, end of year 1 and end of year 2. And we've just collected some data in Logan from like 120 kids over their prep year, and we found that kids made progress on that story. So it seems to actually do a reasonably good job. If you feel you've got value, if there's value in you using the story, then I'm more than happy for you to contact me and I can give you a copy. It's free. There's the bus story, of course. We did all the bus stories as well with the Queensland kids. They're hard to analyze, I must tell you. We'll present on that at the conference. There's a test of narrative language. I don't know if any one of you uses that. It takes a while to administer, and then you end up with a standard score. You think, yeah, great. Now what? There's the ANNIE. That's really nice. It's the Edmonton Narrative Norms Instrument, freely available on the internet for young kids. The stories, procedures. She's got some Canadian norms, Phyllis Schneider, and of course there's the ERNIE as well. I also know that there are lots of informal little assessment tasks that people use. And I think as long as you think about, okay, why am I using it and what's the information I want to get out of it, then that might be perfectly suitable.
Sorry, Marleen. What
Yeah.
are they for different age groups? Like what?
Yeah. I think we used the Anna Gets Lost story from about 4 years of age, which seems to be sort of the youngest age that you can get kids to retell a story in a test format. The ANNIE is quite young as well. The TNL is a bit older. I think they say you can do it with younger kids, but it wasn't very reliable. I think that's what it says in the manual. The early, I'm not sure. I think it might sort of be around 5 as well.
Use it with adults as well, the early.
Yeah, okay.
Teenagers and adults have used it with teenagers.
Yeah,
So I think
okay.
it's also adults.
Yeah, okay. Adults even, I didn't know
I
that.
think so.
Yeah.
Show you something.
Yeah, and the good thing about the test of narrative language is that there are different ways of analyzing that as well. But don't get me started on that because we'll be here all night. So just to give you an idea, like, yeah, but as long as I think, you know, the reason behind doing an oral narrative assessment, it doesn't really matter what tool you use. Okay, and then of course home literacy environment. I do think we often forget about that, especially once kids are sort of in the system. It's so easy because they're there, and then it's hard to get hold of parents, and it's hard to you know, to evaluate what parents do. But really, parents' belief and knowledge and home activities such as shared book reading and other than book reading and all those constructs are really important to set the kids up for success. There's a nice parent questionnaire that was published by Woodrow that we've used quite extensively. Again, if you can't get hold of any of those because you don't have access to, you know, the lovely library systems we have, just email me and I'll send you a copy. Yeah? I just didn't want to print everything out because it was a long list. And parent questionnaires are great because I think they do two things. A, they give you lots of information, and B, they're really good awareness raisers for the families as well. And then of course the other thing is if you do get the chance to look at the quality of book reading, that's been shown to have a huge effect on what children get out of book reading. And we'll talk about some prevention community sort of initiatives in a minute, but what they say is a child must understand at least 90% of the vocabulary of what is, you know, what you read to the child. It's a good opportunity to naturally instruct a child in print functions. Children learn best when others are responsive and engage the child, encouraging the child to actively participate and take turns. Now, do you want to see 2 video clips? Yeah, I think we'll be all right. The left is my sister-in-law. She's a qualified teacher, and this is her son, and they both love reading books. Right? She's okay with me showing this. Surely that will work. Good. No sound and no movement.
Mr. Wolf bowed his best royal bow and said, Your Royal Highness, a nasty wicked witch cast a spell on this delightful charming prince. Please kiss him better. The princess blew her nose on an oily lamp. What's in it for me? She said. A delicious bowl of turnip stew, said Mr. Wolf. Oh, I love turnip stew, said the princess. Yum, yum. You don't look like a princess to me, said the frog. Hush up, frog, and hold still, said the princess. Kissy, kiss, kiss. And shazam! There stood a handsome prince. He was absolutely splendid. Mr. Wolf was very impressed. Your Royal Highness, Mr. Prince, sir, he said politely. Now it's your turn to help me. Oh no, said the princess, simply not done for a prince to be concerned to runny old toots. Out of my way before I throw you in the dungeons. Oh, what a waste of a kiss.
You get the idea, yeah? And I just asked her, I said, can you just read as you normally do? And that's it. Okay, so I tried again. He's a little bit older here, but not much. Oh, do we get the same doodle? Oh yeah, something's happening.
think you double clicked on it.
Are you reading the book by yourself? Can I join you?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What are you reading? What are you reading? Is there a baby in there? George was a giant. The scruffiest giant in town. He always wore the same pair of old brown sandals. Where are they? No, where is old brown sandals? On his feet. Yeah, they're sandals, they're like shoes. And the same old patched up gown that's like a dress. I wish I wasn't the scruffiest giant in town, he said sadly. I can see a duck. Okay, to the page. But one day George noticed a new shop. It was full of fancy clothes. So what did he buy? You tell me what he bought. What did he buy? All these things, what are they? Tell me, what sort of clothes? Take that out. What sort of clothes? Pants? A shirt? Socks? What's that? Black shoes? What's that? It's a tie, like Daddy has, eh? And what's that one? What's that one? Yeah, don't get your fingers happy. What was that? What's that one? A seatbelt. Oh, it's a giraffe. Now George left his old clothes.
Okay, you see the...
Yeah, he warms up as the video goes on. So initially, of course, not a lot happens, right? So again, I think the message here is that she's very intelligent, middle class, you know, person like me. I think frequency doesn't tell us the story, because she reads to him 5-6 times a day, but that's typical way of reading. So finding time or, you know, to observe parents is a very powerful way, and just telling them how to do it may not get the message across, especially with kids with language impairment, because we know that those kids are even less likely to give us any spontaneous information. Okay, right, why doesn't it work? Do you need a break, or are you happy to all just keep going? Keep going? Yeah, so am I, but just checking. Okay, so who is considered at risk then of developing or not developing emergent literacy skills? Children from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and we'll come to that in a minute. Children from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Children at risk of language learning difficulties. So they could be kids, you know, who are sort of late talkers, but also children who have, for example, Down syndrome or identified cognitive impairments, and children with identified speech and or language impairment. So we'll come back to that group later. So let's now look at prevention, preventive intervention, and intervention approaches and some results. Lots of community programs, and I think that is really, really good news. I, of course, can't list them all, but basically what community programs, I've called them community programs because they're available to the wider public, right? Do you agree with me? Yeah. So they are sometimes for the wider public and sometimes for kids who are considered at risk. They're really aimed at promoting emergent literacy. And there's Read and Grow right here in the Gold Coast region. It's grown enormously, I heard. I saw the figures and they are just fantastic. The Hennon programs, of course. There's also the Let's Read initiative. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a well-researched initiative by the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, so it's well worth looking up if you want to get some data on that. It's really, though, those programs are based on the premise that shared reading positively impacts vocabulary development, right? Listening comprehension and print conventions. So again, we're just thinking to the simple view of reading, and we're starting to feed those two different constructs to make sure that we set the kids up for success. And that it also helps to promote phonological awareness and exposes children to conventional reading. Too much reading on the slide, but I thought maybe if I talk too much and you get home, it's probably nice to have it on the slide. Okay, so what they found in some of the Let's Read research is that intensity was important. So higher and broader, they felt would be more beneficial. So what they did is there were 4 visits, and that was with, I think, like the, what do you call them? The child health nurses, for example, 4 visits. And there was an information pack. They weren't very pleased with the results, and they really felt maybe that wasn't enough. So what it tells us again, I think, and it's a very strong message, that just exposing people and telling them to do it may not be enough. We do know that frequency and quality, like I've just pointed out, of big book reading promote children's emergent literacy. So there are some really promising results, especially by some work with Rees and Cox. Now bear in mind, and the same with the Hannon program, quite often these are families from mid sort of socioeconomic areas. Okay, so they may be parents, if you show them once, like Jane says, oh, okay, is that how you do it? And she just does it. Do you know what I mean? So again, those parents, it doesn't necessarily generalize to people who may not have the literacy skills themselves, for example. So not surprisingly, of course, what Seneschal et al. Found is that the parent level of literacy is so important. You know, so they can get kids up to a certain stage, but no further. And what they're thinking is that children's grammar comprehension, if parents' level of literacy isn't very high, that the kind of sentences that they speak to the children may be of a sort of a quite simple nature. So that's an interesting finding too. And again, I think looking at the home literacy environment is thus, really important. Now, they did find that the use of print-focused read aloud by preschool teachers impacted the children's early literacy comprehension 2 years later. So it's such a powerful tool. And what they did, and they are lovely studies, they did read aloud without any print referencing, so really pointing out the letters of the print concept slide that I put up at first. And then they controlled for just exposure to books, and they did real sort of print referencing, and they found a good impact 2 years later. So again, I think there's an important role for us to play. Okay. So, like I said, I'm probably not doing justice for all the fantastic work that's out there, but we're now going to move on to preventive intervention. And there are quite a few initiatives going on here in Queensland at the moment. So they are often implemented in early childhood centres, prep year or year 1, and I'm sure most of you who work for Education Queensland or even private practitioners, you'll be asked by prep teachers. Is that right? Is that what I just heard as well? Yeah, to perhaps screen kids or make sure or sort of provide training, things like that. So it's often targeting, of course, children from low socioeconomic areas because we know those kids are at risk, aimed at developing and strengthening students' foundation skills in language and literacy. I really like that quote, we want to identify effective, proactive solutions to shift children's odds. If we can do that, I think we're doing a fantastic job. So I know that in Central Queensland there's Read It Again, Foundation Q. I don't know if any research has been done into that yet. That's a program that was initially developed in the States. It's got some good results and some not so good results, so it'll be interesting to see. We're running a project in 3 Logan schools called Prep Start. aired on Channel 9 last year. We were happy that most of it was correct. That was on the news. And of course, the really important notion is that the agents of interventions are teachers, teacher aides, and then with assistance from the SLPs. So straight away, you probably think back, oh, we better make sure they've got their phonological awareness and their knowledge is good enough to support that. We'll briefly look at the content of it, and then I want to look at some local results of preventive intervention. So what we do know is that if you implement a preventive intervention, and why I call it preventive intervention is because most of those kids are just considered at risk, right? They enter their schools with poor literacy skills, poor language skills. They might have 5 different home languages. Some kids do, from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So we don't know if these kids have a language disorder or a language difference. So we're going to give them intervention to hopefully prevent future difficulties. So the only thing I want to point out is that it needs to be explicit, systematic, and purposeful, no matter what intervention you recommend to the schools. There are so many programs out there, and it's really scary because the first thing that happens, you walk into a school. I did the other day in Willumba, and they said, oh, have you heard of this program? And I haven't, because it's hard to keep up. Is that what you're finding? Yeah, or schools have already bought it before you can recommend anything, and then you just have to run with it. Just look at the underlying principles, you know. Is it explicit? Because there's good evidence behind it. Make it clear to the kids what you want them to do, you know, because those kids, by the time they're 5, if they haven't learned that, then that sort of incidental learning time is almost over. Now, those are my words, right? So they need to be shown what to do. So we will look at some letters together. Look, both in the word spot, just an example. And I'm sure you all do that, but a lot of people wouldn't make it that explicit. They just expect kids to pick it up. Systematic. Follow a sequence. For example, in phonological awareness, it makes sense to start at syllable level and then go to onset rhyme level, right? So you follow the typical developmental sequence. Lots of programs embed some rhyme. Now, rhyme is great, rhyme is fun, but rhyming skills do not generalize to other phonological awareness skills. So as long as you're aware of that, don't spend too much time on rhyming because it won't make any difference. If a kid's a good rhymer at preschool, that's a really nice indicator that he might be all right, but it's not the other way around. Alphabet knowledge, of course, is hard. People always say, oh, what about the alphabet? Should we start by, at A and start at end at Z? Or what is systematic in alphabet knowledge? Really, there is no rhyme or reason, and I don't think there's any evidence that I could find to suggest it's better to start with the first letter of the child's name, but as long as it's systematic, as in a letter a week, for example, or if little Johnny isn't so fast, maybe it's a letter a month. So it's sort of still systematic introduction. And purposeful. So straight away link the activities as much as you can to purposeful activities. And I've seen that most of the programs like Let's Read and Prep Start, and there are quite a few others, do use purposeful activities as in books that the children usually use. Is that right? Yeah. And I think, again, it's important that teachers realize, those underlying principles and how important they are to affect progress, but also generalization to future reading activities. Okay, so let's look at some of the results of what we call Tier 1 interventions. It's just your general, are you aware with Tier 1 terminology? Yeah, so it's a response to intervention framework, and Tier 1, you give it to all the kids. And then you hopefully get 75% of the kids will do well, and then you only have to give extra intervention to the 25% of the kids who didn't pick up skills as a result. Okay, so in general, it's generally effective in enhancing students' emergent literacy performance. So that's good to know. However, there are quite a few variables that really strongly affect individual kids' progress. And one is group size. You know, the group shouldn't be too large. School attendance, really important, and it makes sense, doesn't it? Teacher characteristics, really, really important. So again, we can't assume that knowledge. I really personally feel we need to do a better job sometimes at educating our future teachers as well, because it's tricky. And initial language performance. So kids who do okay at the beginning will do better at the end, right? And reading beliefs, maternal reading beliefs. So kids who come to school thinking reading's great, you know, mum reads, dad reads, we have books in the home, those kids are likely to do better. Now, there's very little research from what I have found that has really focused on Australian schools, which is really surprising. So I don't know if you've come across much, and please let me know. Because really, if we consider that Australia is one of the most culturally and linguistically diverse countries in the world, I think we have more than 400 different languages here, then really, I'm not sure if much of the research overseas will generalize to the situation here in Australia. And we do know that 1 in 5 primary school age students is considered at risk, and we're all familiar, of course, with the AEDI data. So I think it'll be good to see like a program, like especially like Let's Read, that has been well researched in the States. Let's see if it works here. Or what do we do to adapt it to the Australian situation? I did find a couple of studies by Barbara Dodd and her colleagues a few years ago now. They did 10 weeks of intervention targeting phonological awareness and oral language abilities of what they called socially disadvantaged preschoolers. There was an improvement in phonological awareness and oral language compared to a no intervention class, so that's good to know. All this effort, because it is a lot of work, isn't it? Training your teacher aides, running the small groups, the organization is enormous. However, these gains did not lead to improved reading ability 2 years later, which is very disappointing. And I'm not sure if those kids have been followed up again. No, probably not. Now, we did a Prep Start pilot project, so that wasn't last year, the year before. And it'll be published in the JCP SLP, so our clinical journal. Was really interesting. What they did at that school is there were 3 classes. One class was streamed, like the better ability kids were in one class, and then there were 2 classes that were very similar. What we did is we gave intervention to one of the classes that had the lower ability kids, just on the Brigance, early abilities screener, something. And the other class just got business as usual from the classroom teachers. And what we actually found is that the intervention group, who got all that extra work, got accelerated in their phonological awareness skills compared to the other group, who were at a similar level as you know, the first group, but not their oral language skills. So really, even though everyone was sort of really enthusiastic about the Prep Start program, and it's actually undergone a lot of changes since then, when we looked at the data, and that was a lot of work collecting those data and analyzing them, we found, yeah, benefits on phonological awareness, but not necessarily on oral language. And more importantly, that extra intervention wasn't enough to make, get the kids to catch up to their more able peers over that, I think it was a 14-week period. So all I want to say, and I don't think that's necessarily bad news, it just shows that the feel-good factor doesn't always mean that there's actual progress if you look at the hard data. It's, yeah. So like I said, I'm really looking forward to see if, you know, any data are being collected and read it again. Yeah.
Can I just explain what Foundation Q is? Because I'm Jenny Peach, by the way.
Yeah.
And Foundation Q is actually an authorised version of Read It Again Pre-K. So it was written by myself and 3 other SLPs from the metropolitan region. So we rolled it out in probably about 80 schools in Metro last year, and it's only this year that it's now available to all state schools across the state. So we've got some early data, but this year I think we'll have some much better data on that. And we should have a lot of data really, because there's a lot of schools using it. So yeah, it's sort of an authorised version of pre-K, but it's been written to support the Australian curriculum.
Yeah, and it's using Australian books.
schooling.
And,
Yeah, and we've totally rewritten all the lessons.
Oh, cool.
So it totally matches the curriculum.
Yeah. So great initiative. Like
Yeah,
I said,
yeah.
it'll be really
It'll be
good to see.
It will be interesting to see what
Yeah, absolutely. And to see what aspects work well as well, because all these programs are, like I said, quite intensive and expensive to run in a way. Yeah, cool. Now, what we also did last year is we ran a focus group with teachers and teacher aides, just to find out what teachers liked or didn't like about implementing such programs in their schools. A colleague of mine actually ran the focus group, so she's a qualified teacher and was completely, not related to the school. So there was no danger of the teachers feeling threatened or anything else. And we haven't quite written it up, but she's analysed the data, and actually the teachers really liked the structure of the program. They loved the fact that the lesson plans were all there, and I'm thinking it'll be the same with your ones. The teacher aides were initially a little bit resistant and struggled to implement the program. They said they found it quite hard to understand, and we really think the training aspect could be improved upon. They also felt that actually teachers and teacher aides preferred some books over other books, even though the books were chosen by the speech pathologists and some teachers. It's just interesting how some people really didn't like some books, and it'll be interesting to find out why or why not. One of the issues that they tried to consider was the price of the books. So they had to be like $10 or less, because they bought book bags for the kids so that all the kids could take the books home when they were addressing them in class. So it wasn't just an at-school activity. And they also felt that they wanted more frequent feedback about implementing the program. So they felt like, are we doing all right? Like, we're following the lesson plan, but is this what you're wanting? So again, I think that's really important feedback for all of us to take on board. Perceived barriers, there were quite a few, and I've just pulled out some, as they did feel it interrupted the normal class day. So they did whole class instruction and also individual groups with teacher aides. They found it was really hard when relief teachers came in, for the relief teachers to continue the program. Now, of course, that all seems simple, but the teacher aides didn't like it, because then the relief teachers would do something else, and they would come in and then couldn't do their program. There were some sort of generic sessions organized where people would just catch up as a group, and they felt that was really important to sort of feel part of a team, if you like. So again, I don't think there's anything that we didn't expect, but using that focus group methodology gives you all these rich data about potential sort of confounding factors. We've run some focus group with kids as well, and haven't quite analysed it, but it was fascinating what the kids thought of the program. So yeah, and I do think quite a few of these results will obviously generalise to what you're doing. Yeah, and that program, by the way, is not something that I've helped develop. It's just that the school asked me to sort of help collect the data and analyse the data quantitatively. Okay, now. Bilingual kids, it's hard, isn't it? Sharon McLeod's written quite a few articles on bilingual populations and how many different languages there are, and how many different languages we generally speak as clinicians. Well, I speak 3, but I don't seem to treat many Dutch kids, so it doesn't really help. So what do we do, when we come across kids who speak 2 or more languages? There are 3 options. One is to assess the child in English, regardless of the home language, and I think that's a practice we often use. We can do cross-linguistic assessments and assess in both languages and then compare performance. Now, that's very time-intensive and hard to pull off. some efforts have been put into composite scoring of bilingual children's performance, and I did a study with bilingual Samoan English children, and composite scoring basically means that you look at the child's vocabulary in both languages and you add it together, and boy, it makes a difference, you know, that they do much better when you look at their composite performance in oral narrative comprehension, in expressive vocabulary, and in receptive vocabulary. That was with the help of Gail Hemsley, so that was fantastic. She had prepared the tool. And of course in clinical practice, again, that's hard to pull off. So the only sort of take-home messages I wanted to point out is that if you learn phonological awareness in one language, it will transfer to the other language. There is enough research evidence, not a lot, but that will happen. So if you get the question, you know, like, oh, is it ethical or moral to teach a child in a different language, then yes, it should transfer across if the child has typical language learning ability. There is also cross-linguistic transfer of mental representations of stories. So, you know, if you slowly learn to speak better English and more English, you're exposed to those stories, then your mental models will transfer across to another language. And I thought that was just fascinating. There's quite a bit of research done in the States with Spanish-English populations. Now, of course, you've got to be careful here because this does not take into account cultural differences in storytelling. Okay, so I don't mean to show any disrespect for that, but it does, the general idea of mental representations transfers. And again, home literacy environment. I cannot stress that enough. We did a study of 4-year-old kids that were in immersion kindergartens in New Zealand, Samoan immersion kindergartens, compared them to a group of low socioeconomic monolingual English kids. They were hard to find because most kids speak heaps of languages. And even though the Samoan kids were generally stronger in their vocabulary skills and in some other skills, if we looked at the home literacy environments, then the kids in the Samoan homes weren't being read to. They had fewer than 10 children's books in the home, and there are quite a few other examples like that. Okay? Now, we can't say that that's not good. It just means that, again, we need to raise awareness and we need to take that into consideration. And that Kindy definitely started as sort of like a parent group and information evenings and a lot of instruction for parents as well.
Marleen, have you
Yeah.
found any differences depending on order in the family? Like just thinking of my own children and how much better I was at reading to my eldest child compared to my third child because of just, you know, how busy life gets. So, I mean, has there been any sort of studies?
You know, I'm sure I have, but I haven't been looking into that. Yeah, because there is some research evidence to suggest that younger kids actually do better because they've got all these other models of language around them. So, yeah. And in bilingual homes, it's really interesting because the first child may grow up monolingual, like my one in Dutch, and then the second one, of course, gets this mismatch of languages thrown at them. And so, yeah, if anyone knows the answer? No. But yeah, you're right. That might be different because you just get so busy, don't you? Yeah. Of getting your toddler tamed to read a book to the baby. Yeah. Okay. So what about the kids we have on our caseloads who do have an identified language impairment or difficulty or disorder, whatever you want to call it? We know that kids with a history of language impairments during the preschool years are at increased risk of persistent literacy difficulties. Okay, it's been well researched, and even kids with language impairment at 4, if you test them again at 18, they're still likely to have higher level language and literacy difficulties. So we need to ensure that these kids develop their emergent literacy skills during the preschool period, especially considering the fact that once the kids reach a certain age, they will learn through reading. So we've got to get them on that bandwagon, you know, they have to start learning to read. We know that kids whose phonological disorder, so we're talking speech impairment here, has resolved by the age of 5, have a better prognosis than children who show impaired phonology at the age of 5. So that's what you call the critical age hypothesis. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's that magic 5. But they've, oh, okay. My bad for just copying this slide. Okay, what they found though, that's mediated by the child's phonological awareness abilities. So even if a phonological impairment has resolved by 5, if the child has poor phonological awareness abilities, then they still often won't get to literacy success. Yeah, so that's by Nathan et al, and I've put a reference there. So let's go to the next one. Okay, so if we're considering kids that we see who are during that preschool emergent literacy period, and they may be any age, you know, up to 5.5 or 6 sometimes, we need to consider all the emergent literacy skills that we've just looked at, right? But what we can do is we can letter knowledge, phonological awareness, and speech production can be improved simultaneously. So it doesn't mean that we add a whole lot of other goals. We can integrate it. And Gillen's done some fantastic work. Now I would say that because I studied under Gail Gillen. But what she did is kids who received integrated phonological awareness intervention, and these were kids with quite severe phonological difficulties during the preschool period, showed better speech production as well as reading performance 2 years later than the children who received traditional phonological intervention. So, strong evidence. The other study that I was actually involved in is that phoneme awareness can be facilitated in children with speech impairment as young as 3 years of age. That's little. We had kids coming in who were completely unintelligible. One child just had vowel sounds, right? And what we did as part of this intervention project, we would look at what sounds we were going to stimulate and incorporate letter name knowledge, letter sound knowledge, and phonological awareness, and they got it. There were no phonics, gestures, nothing, just the letters and the letter sounds, and lots of games, and they got it. And the kids did well. So there's no reason, again, to wait until we get a little bit more speech. Just integrate it early on. Similar results were found for children with childhood apraxia of speech. Bridget McNeil has had fantastic results. Again, just incorporating emergent literacy skills and then early reading skills. And for children with Down syndrome. So Marleen Westerveld, my colleague in New Zealand, has done a great study with young children, and I am going to show you this little video clip. Because this is Rupa, he's 7.5, you've seen him, in the emergent literacy stage, very firmly, no S-blends in his speech production word initially. He would recognize SMP letters and had emerging, I might just leave it till the end to see if we have time, emerging phoneme identity knowledge, right? And what we did is we incorporated an activity that did the sounds and the letters. I'll show you at the end, and otherwise I'll happy to email you a link. I put it on YouTube as a hidden link. And he just loved it. I'm just worried that I won't get through in 12 minutes. Okay, and of course book reading is an excellent context for intervention for all children that we see. But it needs to occur across contexts and with different people. Now, this clip I will show you shows a child with Down syndrome, a preschool age child with Down syndrome, and this was part of the intervention study that Anne conducted. So what she did is the parents received training to implement a home program, and it was all about print concepts, integrating print concepts. And she wanted them to build vocabulary, print concepts, and speech production. Yes. Who else does that? Okay, bear with me because it's quite a few events. Seminar, one.
You're right. Spot. Yes, there's another spot goes to the, what's there?
Hello.
It is, it's an M. You're right. Are they in the barn? Moo. You say moo. Where do you say moo? Up here. Moo. You're right, I can see a barn. Hurry up, Spot. Can't find your names. What are they saying? Ba, ba, ba. Look, it's a B. You're right. Can you say Spot's name? Spot. Spot. Black. You're right.
So cool.
Yeah, and I put some references for her study. She's had some fantastic results, really putting these kids, you know, it sort of getting them to start reading, and they're still doing really well. So they're showing great early reading progress. Okay, children with autism spectrum disorders. We've just done a bit of a review there, and it's been fascinating because in general, and when talking to clinicians, we don't tend to worry that much about literacy skills in kids with autism. And why that seems to be is because these kids often learn to read or write. Is that what you're finding? What we also find though is, and there was a great study by Kate Nation, is that once they get to year 3 or 4, they will read without meaning. They miss, and that seems logical, but the language comprehension skills to understand what they're actually reading. And when testing their phonological awareness, actually they're not very good at the higher levels of phonological awareness. So again, we think back to all the constructs that make up emergent literacy. We're providing intervention for young kids with ASD. It's going to be very important to at least evaluate these skills and work towards that reading with comprehension. Very, very little research has been done in that area. A great article is by Lanter et al., and it talks about the role of the speech pathologist in working in emergent literacy with kids with ASD. So again, if you want a copy of that, I'm more than happy to share that with you. Okay, so an integrated approach. What does that mean? And I didn't make this up. I've just stolen this concept from my colleagues. People. We need to involve parents, teachers, teacher aides, and we're there in partnership with them. And I know I'm preaching to the converted, and I know it's hard work, but hopefully I've given you some evidence today to show, okay, I'm going to try again. We need to look across speech, language, and literacy. No matter what we do with these young kids, integrate literacy, emergent literacy activities as much as you can. Hear, say, read, and write, you know. What we did with some kids, I really like sleeves, plastic sleeves, and whiteboard markers. They're just the best because you can wipe it out again, and just to get the kids to get involved in writing, whatever it is. And then curriculum links, of course. Once they're at school, that's much, it's not easier, but at least we've now got a curriculum, so that's good. But really talking about, you know, functional targets. What will help these kids participate in their classroom environment in early childhood centers or even in daycare centers? You know, it's about social inclusion, academic inclusion, expectations really across curriculum areas, and looking ahead, what's expected next year? Because you always seem to play catch up with these kids, don't we? All right, so the role, and that's by no means the whole list. We do lots of work in general promotion of literacy. And if we look at the Speech Pathology Australia, we call it policy document, it makes it very clear that we have a very strong role to play in literacy. Okay, it's not just a teacher's domain. Language and reading are so closely linked, we just cannot avoid to become or to be involved. education and training, I think at this stage at least, just sort of assuming that we can generalize to some of the results that Jane Carroll has found, I think we're probably more expert in these areas than a lot of other people who we ask to do the work, especially in preventive intervention situations. So we need some direct involvement, modeling and feedback of what we actually want to achieve. And then of course there's direct intervention for children with identified speech or language disorders. And really that integrated approach, and there's quite good evidence now. Gail Gillen's website again has some lesson plans right there for kids with speech impairment, kids with CAS as well, that you can adapt for your own practice. And it's all in partnership with families, educators, and the children themselves, of course. All right, that's my last slide. Do you want to see the other video? I'm just going to show it. I've got 5 minutes. Okay. Any questions or comments? Yep.
You mentioned earlier that the early years workers benefited from getting both training and coaching. Could you explain the difference between training and coaching?
Yeah, so the training was your traditional 90-minute workshop. So really showing people what phonological awareness was and what the program looked like. And coaching was really modeling, then getting the teacher aides or whoever to implement the program, to do a shared reading session with the children in front of class, to observe them. It's almost like going back to your Bachelor of Teacher Education, to give them feedback and then to do it again. So that's what's meant by coaching. And that seemed to have a much, much better effect. Yeah.
Just had a question about the context for, I think, the quality of reading. Children must understand 90% of vocabulary in the book. Given sort of that we're really looking at book reading starting from birth, I'm just...
That's a good question. That's a trick question. Yes, you're right. So from birth, it's going to be quite hard. So basically from birth, it probably means just engaging and pulling faces and happy and pointing out single words.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've just found that you can actually read, or you can get away with reading beautiful, longer books, like even like, you know, Possum Magic and that kind of thing with babies, and then you have to pull potentially right back with your toddler as they become movable and can vote with their feet. So is that physical development part of that?
I think the general idea behind it is if the child understands, it's zone of proximal development, that's what it is. So if the child understands less than 90% of the vocabulary, he may just love sitting close to you, he may love that whole, you know, interaction part of it. He won't learn much new language from it because it'll just go way over his head. So that's the research evidence I was looking at. I don't think there's anything wrong, you know, and I think most typical kids, they pick it up incidentally, they'll be okay anyway. But when things aren't quite that automatic, it's quite important to look at the level of language input. Yeah.
And with studies like Dog Study, are there any sort of similar things, research, where they've not only done the teacher or the teacher aide or the kindy worker training, but also involved parent training as an element of that? I'd just be interested to see whether the research outcomes improved or the outcomes improved if they also involve the parents in that sort of training. And
I don't think that study did. Sharon was part of the original study.
No, it didn't.
No. There's bound to be some evidence from Laura Justice's work that she's doing. She got this amazing multi-million-dollar grant. I think she said for every word she wrote in that application, she got like $1,000 or something. It was a bit of a joke, but you know, like she got that much money. So I'm thinking there must be something, because ultimately, I think I sometimes worry a little bit, and I'm not sure if I'm right in that, but I'm thinking, oh, by the time they get to prep, you know, I don't think we're ever too late, but I think, oh, how can we get in earlier? And that's where the community programs are so important. But no, you're right. That'll be interesting. Yeah.
Could I just check that with Gillian's work and others,
Yeah.
that she is actually explicitly naming the letters and using the sounds simultaneously? Or not?
Probably in the intervention study that I was referring to, we will probably use the letter sounds more. Yeah.
Because it's often a discussion you have with parents who
Yeah.
love teaching the alphabet to their children.
Yeah.
And then wonder why they come across that
Yeah.
later on.
What is really interesting is that the literature suggests that letter name knowledge is an important predictor of future success. Now, I don't think it's necessarily knowing the letter of the names of the letters. I think it's the fact that they've been sort of, exposed to all these letters, right? I think if we're talking about phonological awareness work and speech production work, then yes, I would definitely stick to the sounds. Although you could say, look, that's the letter M. I don't think it will confuse kids that much. And we found that young ones, actually, they weren't easily confused, which is interesting. Because sometimes you do wonder, and that was the critical feedback she got initially, like, oh, are we pushing kids too hard? No, they were happy, to do that. Good point.
In the good old days, that's what Sesame Street used to do.
Oh.
Back in the early 80s,
Yeah.
they'd name the letter, and then they'd have words and sounds. Not like they used to.
Any other questions or comments? Because it's 5 on the dot. Food for thought? Oh, you want to see it? I just think if people want to leave, then don't feel rude. It's not long. I just want to show off, that's all. This is the very first time we saw him. He's 7.5.
What I can do? Can I go first?
Yeah.
Okay, are you listening to me? Where are your listening ears? Are they on?
Yeah.
Okay, listen carefully. And huh. I'm going to put them together. Nice job. Am I clever?
No.
Okay.
No.
One more.
The Hawaii.
What about with the little ball? Yeah, give me a little ball. That's too hard.
Oh, I think you can do it.
Can I do it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe Bruce can help.
You ready? I did it.
You did
Okay, do you want to try it?
No.
Okay, can I try it one time? And
No.
then we'll do my other game.
Look, do you want to do the big ball or the little ball?
Yes, Dad.
Which one? Oh, do you want to use the bag? We're going to throw them in a minute.
Oh.
Okay. Can I get you to try one thing?
Alright.
Okay.
Yes, Dad.
Okay.
Little
Yes,
ball.
Dad.
Oh,
I think use that. I think little ball's a good idea.
Little one.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. Together.
He's been watching.
Ready? Deep. Oh,
What happened to Pip?
Yeah.
Shall we be cool?
Yeah.
Okay. I've got my listening ears on.
I didn't hear it last time.
No, okay. Listen carefully. What sound did the ball make? And as we put them together, we go Start with the sound. Here. Beautiful, beautiful.
I heard it right over here on this side of the
High
room.
five. Okay, that's very good.
Job.
Can we do something?
Just throw it.
Oh, so nice. Yeah. All right. That's all we've got time for. So please give me some feedback or email me or come and talk to me. Oh, yeah, we've used it with 4-year-olds. We've got norms for typical 4-year-old New Zealand children, but it gives you some idea. Yeah, the kids usually give about 7 sentences, so it's really quick. We're now trialing a very quick scoring procedure, like without having to transcribe it all. We're just going to listen to it again and to see, okay, you know, what are the main elements in the story, some idea about grammatical accuracy. I have no idea if this is going to work out well, but we want to do quick ones, you know, to get an idea and to at least get people to consider narrative. So yeah, it's worth a try. Yeah, yeah. The thing is, if they don't do it, doesn't mean they can't. Cool. All right, class dismissed.